I once walked into my own house and found my son standing there with a folder of papers that didn't belong to him. He didn't flinch when I asked what he was doing. He just told me he had already taken care of my finances, as if my life were an account he could log into. That was the moment I realized something had shifted, and not in my favor. If you've ever faced a quiet betrayal like that, tell me your story in the comments. The morning it started, the house felt still, the kind of stillness that presses against your ribs. I sat at the kitchen table, lifted the lid of my laptop, and waited for the banking site to load. A few routine emails came through, then one that wasn't routine at all. A monthly statement had a list of transfers I had never approved. The amounts weren't enormous, but they were steady, deliberate, pulled from my retirement account, as if someone had mapped out a slow drain. Another file showed an insurance form stamped as completed. The signature looked like mine at a glance, but the angle of the pen strokes felt wrong. I opened the drawer where I kept old paperwork, hoping there was some explanation. Instead, a letter from my insurer sat on top of the pile. It wasn't addressed to me. My son's name was printed across the front with a note inside about an upcoming capacity evaluation. That term landed with a weight I hadn't expected. No one had mentioned any evaluation, certainly not me. A scrap of paper lay on the counter near the coffee maker. A reminder for an appointment with a neurologist written in Laura's tidy handwriting. The date circled in red. I had never booked anything like that. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the quiet clarity that comes when something clicks in the wrong direction. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Evan walked in, straightening his tie like he owned the room. He glanced at the laptop screen, then at the letter in my hand. "Dad, let us handle this. You've been forgetting things. It's better if we take over." His tone carried a softness that didn't match the firmness underneath. A rehearsed ease, the kind lawyers use when they're already 2 steps ahead. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The confidence in his posture said enough. My palm drifted toward the folder on the table. He noticed. His eyes tightened for a second before he forced a calm expression back onto his face. "There's no need to stress yourself. Laura and I already organized everything." The word everything hung between us. I didn't challenge him. No point arguing with someone who'd built an entire story before you even entered the conversation. Instead, a small nod formed more out of habit than agreement. Taking a step back gave me space to think. Evan asked where I was going. The question floated in the air, unanswered. Leather greeted me when I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine rumbled to life, steady and familiar. A faint vibration ran through the steering column, grounding me more than anything that morning had managed to. My grip around the wheel settled, not in anger, but in the kind of steadiness that comes when you recognize a line has been crossed long before you admitted it. The car rolled toward Burnside, without any real destination in mind. Habit pulled me into a small diner tucked between a hardware store and an old bookstore. I'd stopped there countless times after hikes on the western trails, usually for a plate of eggs and a moment of quiet before heading home. That morning, quiet didn't follow me in. My phone buzzed the moment I sat down. Then again, and again. One message read, "Evan just wants what's best for you." Another chimed in, "Don't be so stubborn. Don't be. Let him help." Each text came from someone who meant well, people who had shared dinners, holidays, and the small routines that knit a family together. Good intentions didn't soften the blow. Hearing the same lines repeated by different mouths made it clear Evan and Laura had already been busy shaping the narrative. A waitress filled my cup. Steam rose in thin spirals, but nothing settled my thoughts. More notifications stacked on the screen. A cousin wondered if I felt overwhelmed lately. My sister asked whether I had considered appointing Evan as my guardian, just to ease the pressure. The words carried no malice, yet they struck with a kind of precision that told me those conversations weren't spontaneous. Rumors had a way of spreading faster than facts. By the third message, someone had already decided I shouldn't be living alone. Another implied I had forgotten to pay bills for months. That one stung. My bills were automated, a system I had set up myself. The sting wasn't about the lie. It was knowing Evan or Laura had provided the spark. A memory surfaced of finding my bedroom rearranged one afternoon. Laura claimed she was just tidying. Another time, Evan insisted on replacing my debit card because the old one looked worn. He activated the new one for me, holding it like he was doing me a favor. Tax paperwork had also disappeared from my desk, only to reappear weeks later, with Laura's handwriting marking sections I never asked her to review. I had chalked those moments up to overhelpfulness. Looking back, they formed a trail. One call broke the pattern of polite concern. The name on the screen belonged to Marcellus Grant. We'd worked together years ago at the Water Bureau. He didn't contact me often, but when he did, it was never trivial. "Arthur, why is your name in an audit file for a private investment fund?" His question landed with a jolt. That fund was something Evan once mentioned in passing, nothing more. "I hadn't touched any investment tied to it. I haven't joined anything like that, Mark." He went quiet for a moment. "Then someone used your information. Thought you should know." Explaining the morning's discoveries didn't take long. Marcellus listened without cutting in. No gasps, no disbelief. When I finished, he let out a low breath. "If you stay silent, they'll keep pushing. If you confront them, expect resistance. Direct words free of judgment." That was one thing I always appreciated about him. He didn't prod for details, but didn't sugarcoat anything either. My fork scraped the plate without tasting much of the food. Each message from relatives, each comment shaped by half-truths or assumptions, tightened something inside me. They weren't trying to hurt me. They simply believed what they'd been told. That realization carried its own kind of heaviness. When the people closest to you adopt someone else's version of your life, it leaves you standing alone, even when surrounded by familiar names. By the time I paid the bill, the buzzing had slowed, but the echo of those messages lingered. A drive up toward Mount Hood felt necessary, not for recreation, but for space. The cabin there had belonged to my wife's family. After she passed, I kept it because it held a kind of steadiness the city sometimes lacked. The road curved through tall trees, and the climb higher gave my mind something to settle against. The cabin appeared after the final bend, weathered but solid. Unlocking the door stirred a thin cloud of dust drifting upward before settling again. Boxes rested where I'd left them months earlier, a folded blanket draped over the back of an old chair. Nothing had been touched. My bag dropped near the entryway. The folder of documents I'd grabbed from home slid out corners, catching the faint draft. Walking across the small room, I knelt near the wood stove and arranged a few logs. The crackle of ignition broke the long stretch of silence. Heat slowly gathered as I placed the folder onto the table. Papers shifted under their own weight, as if urging me to open them. Instead, I sank into the chair opposite the stack, elbows resting on my knees. The phone buzzed once more, but I didn't reach for it. Morning settled over the cabin in a slow, muted way. Papers spread across the table waited for me, the same stack I'd avoided touching the night before. A few pages shifted when I pulled out the chair, and the movement broke the stillness enough for my phone to vibrate. The number belonged to the bank. The woman on the line introduced herself, then asked a question that tightened something low in my stomach. "Mr. Hale, we're confirming that you granted your daughter-in-law full access to your accounts. We just need verbal confirmation." The words didn't make sense at first. My hand gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't authorize that." She hesitated. "The document has your signature." Hearing that pushed a strange uncertainty through my chest. A moment passed before I answered. "I want a copy of the form." Her tone shifted into something procedural. "Of course, we'll email it immediately." After the call ended, the cabin felt smaller. The email arrived within minutes. A PDF opened slowly. The signature resembled mine, with unsettling accuracy. The angle of the strokes mimicked habits I'd developed over decades. A second glance, then a third, didn't ease the discomfort. Something about the pressure on certain letters didn't match the way my hand naturally moved. A thought crept in from a direction I didn't expect. Had I forgotten signing something, maybe Evan had handed me a form on a busy day. Maybe I'd skimmed the text and scrawled my name without thinking. People do that. People my age do that more than they admit. The possibility stirred a dull panic. Yet the memory wouldn't surface no matter how far back I searched. Nothing connected. Another vibration broke the silence. A text from Evan. "Don't make this harder. We're trying to protect you." His message read like a scripted reassurance the kind lawyers give clients before a deposition. Warm words chilled by intention. Not long after, an email from Laura appeared with a spreadsheet attached. She had labeled it Financial Overview. Dozens of numbers filled the screen. Sections were color-coded with notes claiming missed payments, inconsistency, poor management. The problem was simple. Half those entries weren't mine, and the errors looked engineered rather than accidental. A pulse of irritation moved through the room. They weren't merely stepping over lines, they were redrawing the map entirely. Attempts to log into one of my shared family accounts failed. Password changed. Another site locked me out. A message popped up saying I no longer had permission to view certain insurance records. They had prepared this long before I recognized the pattern. Evan must have contacted people in our circle, priming them with phrases about my memory and judgment. That explained the diner texts, the sympathetic tones, the worried questions. The slow encroachment of their control revealed itself in layers. Every small favor now carried a second meaning. I reached for my phone again, opened the call log, and found the bank number. Recording apps weren't tools I ever used, but a quick search brought one up. The next call connected through the app. This time I asked the employee to restate every detail about the form. Her calm, polite voice became evidence the moment she confirmed the signature again. Screenshots captured the email from Laura, each attachment saved in multiple folders. My camera clicked as I photographed the forged signature. Another tab opened to remove Evan's access to a shopping account he used under my name. A security alert popped up asking if the change was intentional. I confirmed it. The cabin creaked lightly when the wind pressed against it, and the sound tugged old memories forward. My wife used to hum while making coffee in this place. She'd lean on that same table sorting mail while I fixed whatever pipe or hinge needed attention. Her absence had softened some memories, but sharpened others. A sadness moved through me, not dramatic, just deep enough to sit beside the disappointment already widening in my chest. Losing trust in strangers is easy. The heart adjusts quickly. Losing trust in your own child feels like something tearing quietly, strand by strand. The folder on the table seemed heavier now. I pushed aside bank statements, tax forms, and letters until the wooden surface showed through. At the back of the drawer beneath the table rested an old wooden box, its hinges stuck a little from disuse. When I lifted the lid, a few keepsakes from my father revealed themselves: a watch that no longer ticked a pocket knife, and a sealed envelope I'd never opened. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. My name appeared in my father's careful handwriting. For years I'd told myself I would read it when the moment felt right. Apparently the moment had arrived without asking for permission. Fingers brushed the sealed edge. A breath came slowly gathering before it left me again. I placed the envelope on the table, resting one hand over it, letting the weight of everything settle around the motion rather than sinking into me. The day hadn't chosen a direction yet. Neither had I. The drive down from Mount Hood carried me through long stretches of quiet, the envelope resting in the passenger seat as if it weighed more than paper. Rose City Cemetery sat just off Fremont, tucked into its own corner of Portland life. I hadn't visited my father's grave in years, not out of neglect, but because memory surfaced on its own, without needing markers or dates carved in stone. The path curved between rows of headstones. A bench waited near his plot, the same one I'd used after his funeral. My hand brushed the top of his marker before I sat. The envelope tore open with a soft rip. 2 items slipped out a war bond my father must have kept hidden for decades, and a folded letter written in ink that had browned at the edges. Unfolding it brought his handwriting back to me, firm and deliberate. He wrote about the bond, how it was meant for a time when you need protection more than pride. A few lines urged me to stay steady when people I trusted disappointed me. The words didn't offer emotion, only intent. That suited him. He had always believed preparation was its own form of love. A vibration rattled against the bench. Evan's name appeared on the screen, then reappeared after the first call went ignored. His persistence matched the frequency of someone trying to force a door open rather than knock. 5 calls in a row. A 6th arrived with a text attached. "You need to call me now. This is serious." Another buzz followed with a second message. "We filed a petition. You brought this on yourself." Reading that dissolved whatever trace of hesitation remained. I opened the court link he'd sent. The petition listed evidence submitted by Evan and Laura, allegations that I had forgotten to pay utilities, misplaced medication, jeopardized my own well-being. None of it reflected truth, yet the document carried the authority of legal formatting and official stamps. If approved, the petition would hand them complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, and every part of daily life. The bench felt colder beneath me. Evan called again. This time I answered not out of willingness, but because refusing to hear him wouldn't change what he'd already done. "Dad, don't panic. It's just a precaution." His voice stayed smooth, practiced. "You're slipping. We can't keep pretending you're fine." A breath slipped out before I spoke. "I know what I'm doing. Nothing more." The line went quiet. Then he tried to explain himself, words tumbling into justifications, accusations, reassurances. I ended the call mid-sentence. The envelope slid back into my jacket. Leaving the cemetery required more resolve than arriving. My father's letter traveled with me like a weight placed gently on the spine. Not oppressive, just unmistakable. Portland Water Bureau wasn't far. The old brick building looked no different from when I retired. The front desk clerk recognized me, her eyes widening slightly before she smiled. "Arthur, haven't seen you in a long time." I told her I needed copies of my performance evaluations and medical clearance files from the year I retired. She led me to the records office where a staff member pulled them quickly. My name still carried enough history there to move things along without questions. When the folder reached my hands, relief mingled with something heavier. Proof of competence shouldn't be necessary at my age, yet here I was retrieving documentation to defend my sanity against my own son. While walking toward the exit, the clerk stepped closer. "Your daughter-in-law called earlier. She asked if we'd noticed anything off about you the last time you visited." The sentence left her lips with reluctance, as though she regretted repeating it. That reluctance didn't soften the impact. Laura had reached into a place I'd dedicated most of my adult life to planting seeds of doubt, where my reputation had been built over years of work. The building's lobby blurred slightly as I continued toward the door. Not visually, just in the way certain moments do when a part of your foundation shifts. The folder pressed against my ribs under one arm. My grip tightened without conscious intent. Feet found the next step, then the next, blending into the stream of pedestrians. No one looked twice. The anonymity steadied me more than any attempt at comfort would have. The sidewalk stretched forward. I kept moving each stride, leveling out the rhythm, settling into something even and controlled. The lawyer's office sat above a bike repair shop on a narrow street downtown. No receptionist, no polished lobby, just a wooden door with a frosted pane and the faint smell of toner drifting from a printer somewhere. Marcellus had said the man was blunt but trustworthy, the kind who didn't waste time impressing anyone. He rose from his desk when I entered, introduced himself as Dennis Corbin, and gestured toward a chair. The walls were lined with mismatched shelves crowded with case files. A single lamp pushed enough light across the room for us to see each other clearly. Dennis listened while I explained the situation, taking sparse notes. He didn't react much, only tightened his jaw a little when I mentioned the forged signature. Before he could ask questions, my phone chimed. An unfamiliar address had sent an email. The subject line read, "You need to see this." Opening it brought up a message with no name attached. The sender claimed to be a former staff member at Evan's firm. The letter described whispered conversations between Evan and Laura months earlier. They had discussed guardianship asset control and ways to justify intervention for Arthur's safety. Attached were photos, scraps of paper showing attempts to mimic my signature, a list of transactions marked with checkboxes, and a digital note referencing Arthur's liquid assets as a target worth securing. One sentence from the letter stood out. "They planned this before you showed any problems. Be careful." Dennis leaned forward, studying each attachment with a concentrated frown. His fingers traced the date stamps. "This isn't subtle," he said. "They've been building a framework around you." Hearing it stated plainly brought a strange clarity. No speculation. No doubt. Just fact. Later that afternoon, Marcellus joined me at a diner near the Justice Center. He slid into the booth with the same ease he had years ago during our lunch breaks. "You look like hell," he muttered. Busy day. He waited until the waitress left before speaking again. "I heard from someone downtown that your son filed his petition aggressively. He's pushing hard. You're being cornered, Arthur. They're aiming to take everything." His tone wasn't dramatic. It was the kind used when saying it's going to rain or your tire's low. A simple acknowledgement of reality. "But you've still got an angle," he added. "Just depends how far you're willing to go." That question sat between us. Doing nothing meant Evan would finalize guardianship. Fighting back meant blowing open a conflict that wouldn't stay private. Both roads would burn something. The booth vibrated slightly when my phone started buzzing again. A cousin left a voicemail telling me she was concerned about my decline. An old colleague emailed, wondering why I hadn't told him about recent health issues. Someone from church sent a message saying they were praying for my stability. Each note felt rehearsed, as if they'd all been given a script. Marcellus glanced at the screen and shook his head. "They're feeding everyone the same story. That's deliberate. People don't coordinate this tightly by accident." He wasn't wrong. Laura had always been efficient. If she wanted an idea planted, she knew exactly how to deliver it to the right ears. And Evan knew how to frame things to sound compassionate, even while setting a trap. Another email arrived from an IRS return address. A notice indicated discrepancies in recent filings. The numbers didn't match anything I recognized. Someone had submitted altered reports using my information. The path toward financial ruin had been paved neatly, piece by piece. Understanding dawned slowly. They wanted isolation. Isolation makes someone easier to frame, easier to control. A choice started forming quiet but solid. The war bond my father left wasn't about sentiment. It was leverage. Its age and value meant opening a full audit would trigger a chain reaction through every financial record tied to me, and by extension tied to Evan and Laura. If they had tampered with anything, that audit would expose it. The idea felt like gripping a handle that had been waiting in the dark. I told Marcellus what I intended. He didn't try to talk me out of it. "Then do it clean," he said. "Document every step. Make sure they can't twist it back on you." Back outside, the day had cooled. Downtown traffic murmured in the distance. People passed in clusters carrying grocery bags or backpacks detached from the storm building around me. The Morrison Bridge wasn't far. Walking helped settle my mind. The span overlooked a stretch of river that had carried countless ships long before Evan was born. Metal underfoot vibrated faintly each time a truck crossed behind me. A hand slipped into my jacket pocket fingertips, brushing the envelope's rigid edge. The bond rested inside, unchanged by the years it had stayed hidden. My father had called it a safeguard for when the world turns sharper than you expect. He'd been right. Traffic hummed at my back while the city stretched ahead. The courthouse stood on the opposite side of the river, a small outline against the cluster of buildings. My thumb pressed lightly against the envelope, and I kept walking toward the east end of the bridge, the decision sitting steady in my chest. The short-term apartment in northeast Portland felt stripped of personality, the kind of place rented by people passing through transitions they'd rather not explain. A small metal desk stood against the wall, and stacks of folders quickly claimed every inch of space on it. Papers covered the bed as well, arranged in loose clusters that made sense only to me. Printer ink lingered in the air. Pages rolled out steadily: bank statements, account summaries, transaction logs. 12 unauthorized transfers surfaced over 8 months, each one routed through a pattern that looked intentional once laid side by side. Dates aligned with moments when Evan or Laura had visited, which added another layer to the timeline. Older documents came next. Signatures pulled from mortgage refinances, insurance renewals, work contracts, my actual handwriting etched across years of decisions. Each authentic sample lay beside the forged version. A few lines matched closely, but the slant shifted at the end of certain letters, the pressure inconsistent. It was the hand of someone practicing precision, not someone signing from instinct. Emails filled another folder. Laura's tone changed depending on the audience, warm and concerned when writing to relatives, clipped, and corrective when addressing me. Evan's texts echoed the same duality. Screenshots captured each thread. My thumb scrolled until repetition blurred the lines together. Dennis met me 2 days later in his cramped office. "You've got enough here to file a counterpetition," he said, "and ask the court for temporary asset protection. If you wait, they'll argue you consented by silence. We reviewed strategies outlining everything in plain terms." Dennis recommended pushing for a full financial investigation of Evan and Laura, not as retaliation, but as a safeguard. If they touched anything outside your accounts, an audit will catch it. And if they didn't, then we lose nothing. His calm approach steadied something inside me. Emotion had slipped from the process. Focus took its place. What had started as panic now felt like architecture measuring, cutting, assembling. Leaving the office, a flicker of movement near the corner of the block caught my attention. A car idled too long at the curb. The driver stared straight ahead, face unreadable. When I turned the opposite direction, the engine hummed and crept forward. It could have been coincidence. The timing said otherwise. Later that night, my email flashed an alert, unauthorized login attempt. The location wasn't anywhere I had been. Passwords changed, recovery codes, printed backup keys, written down and hidden. Another breached the mailbox outside the apartment, hung slightly ajar, even though I remembered pushing it closed earlier. Then Laura's message arrived. The farther you drag this out, the more people will be disappointed. No insults, no threats, just a blade wrapped in courtesy. A quote from Benjamin Franklin drifted in uninvited distrust and caution are the parents of security. My father used to repeat that when warning me about signing anything in a hurry. The truth of it settled deeper than her words. I didn't answer. Meeting Marcellus at Pioneer Square gave the day a different weight. He handed over a folder he'd organized himself filled with notes from contacts who had overheard bits of conversation around Evan's office. Nothing dramatic, but enough to confirm that the narrative about my decline was being circulated systematically. "This isn't them worried about you," he said. "This is them closing ranks." People filtered through the square carrying coffee cups and backpacks. Downtown noise mingled ordinary and indifferent. We talked only as long as needed. He clasped my shoulder before leaving a brief gesture that grounded me. Walking back toward the apartment, the shift within me became unmistakable. The fear that had tightened around my ribs loosened. Something colder, clearer settled into its place. Defending myself wasn't enough anymore. The only path forward required exposing everything cleanly, methodically, without haste. Back at the apartment, the day's documents waited in a neat pile. A narrow safe sat near the desk, bolted to the floor. Kneeling beside it, I spun the dial and opened the door. The envelope with the war bond slipped to the back corner behind the growing stack of evidence. The light switch clicked under my hand. Shadows peeled away from the room. One folder after another went into the safe until the space filled. The metal door closed with a steady thud. My fingers turned the dial, each number falling into place. The wheel slowed under my touch, its movement steady, controlled, deliberate. The summons arrived early, tucked beneath the apartment door with the rest of the morning mail. A sharp envelope corner pressed into my palm as I opened it. Multnomah County Court requested my presence to address questions regarding cognitive capacity. No ambiguity, no pretense. A formal demand disguised as concern. Less than an hour later, the phone rang. Water Bureau's HR director, someone I'd mentored years ago, asked if I could come in to clear up a few things. Her tone strained, careful, like she was testing the surface of a frozen lake. "Rumors are circulating, Arthur. We just want your side." A second email appeared before the call ended. The bank notified me that part of my retirement account had been frozen pending verification of unusual activity. Everything struck at once, each blow landing with the timing of a choreographed attack. Dennis met me outside the courthouse. He carried his briefcase as if it were fused to his arm, his expression unreadable. "I've seen coordinated hits before," he said quietly. "This has fingerprints all over it." People moved through the entrance with folders and handbags, unaware of the storm tightening around my ribs. We climbed the steps. A clerk handed us another envelope, Evan's latest filing. It contained fabricated reports stating I'd been wandering outdoors, disoriented, misplacing medication, and posing risk to personal safety. One form claimed I'd fallen and struck my head during a blackout. Another referenced a medical examination that never took place. The ease with which they'd built an entire false history sickened me more than the accusations. I studied the paperwork, not with panic, but with something steadier. A slow exhale cleared space in my chest. Dennis gathered the pages and placed them in a folder. "They're overplaying their hand," he muttered, "which means they're scared." The hearing room filled quickly. Evan sat at one table in a suit too crisp for the occasion, expression composed, while his eyes flicked toward me whenever he thought I wasn't watching. Laura stayed rigid beside him, clutching a pen with a grip that bordered on defensive tension. Across from them, our table held only a stack of evidence: the recorded bank calls, the anonymous letter, the forged signatures, the war bond tied to old tax records. Dennis arranged everything with deliberate calm. Proceedings began. A judge with a tired face listened as Evan's lawyer read through the accusations. Phrases about memory lapses and safety risks landed one after another. Evan nodded solemnly at each claim, performing concern with practiced ease. When it came to our turn, Dennis rose. Your Honor, we have evidence that the petitioners manipulated financial documents, forged signatures, and misrepresented medical information. These materials demonstrate a pattern of intentional deception. He handed over several binders. Pages turned. Pens scratched. Laura shifted in her chair. Evan's jaw tightened. The judge asked Laura to explain a series of deposits made to a personal account she had not disclosed. Her voice wavered, defensive explanations colliding mid-sentence. The judge pressed. Her version of events crumbled almost immediately. Then Evan faced questions about the fabricated medical report. He tried to redirect to cushion the implications. He couldn't. The judge repeated a single question until silence backed him into a corner. Watching my son flounder beneath the weight of his own lies didn't bring relief. It hollowed something quiet within me, more absence than emotion. When he finally lifted his gaze, I met it. No anger, no appeal, only an acknowledgement of the path he'd chosen. The judge called a brief recess. I rose, stretching stiff muscles. Evan approached, voice low. Dad, we can fix this if you just... The sentence never finished. Dennis stepped between us, reminding him the recess wasn't for negotiation. Evan retreated, tossing a glare back at me as he moved. When the hearing resumed, Dennis submitted the final piece, the war bond and accompanying tax documents. The judge skimmed the pages, then ordered an independent forensic audit of every financial account connected to me, including any managed or accessed by Evan and Laura. A ruling wasn't issued yet, but the tide had turned. Even Evan knew it. His shoulders slumped for a moment, barely visible, unless you knew him well. The session adjourned. People stood papers, rustled chairs, scraped. I gathered my folder and walked toward the exit. Evan called after me my name, sharp, urgent, breaking through the noise. I didn't pause. The courtroom doors slid shut on their track, muffling everything behind me as I stepped into the hallway and kept moving. The new studio in Northeast Portland sat above a bakery that opened before dawn. No carpet, no decorations, just a narrow room with a kitchenette and enough shelving for the essentials. The hearings ended 2 weeks earlier. Dennis handled the final filings. The court ordered a full forensic audit and froze Evan and Laura's ability to access anything tied to my name. Results came back quickly, not in my favor or theirs, but in favor of the truth. Evan's bar license was suspended pending investigation. Laura's CPA credential landed under review after auditors traced altered entries to her work computer. Both were flagged for elder financial abuse. News traveled through the family in fragments. A cousin texted an apology without explaining what she was sorry for. My sister called once, hung up before leaving a voicemail. None of it surprised me. People always scramble when the spotlight shifts. The part that surprised me showed up one night as I was sorting through documents on the kitchen counter. The old fear of being alone crept around the edges. Not loneliness itself, loneliness, and I had an understanding, but the fear of having no one left who remembered me as more than a name on paperwork. That fear had kept me bending, tolerating excusing behavior I should have confronted years ago. Recognition struck with the weight of something overdue. I hadn't been patient out of love. Not really. I'd been patient because I was terrified of losing the little family I had. Terrified of facing the empty spaces left after my wife died. Terrified of being a burden or worse, forgotten. Admitting that offered a strange relief. Fear acknowledged is fear reduced. My father once wrote, "A man who knows his weakness is closer to strength than one who pretends he has none." His letter lived in the same drawer as the war bond, now the paper worn at the folds, from being opened and closed. Administrative tasks filled the following days. Dennis forwarded documents requiring my signature orders, cutting Evan and Laura from all decision-making rights forms, reinstating full control of my accounts notices, to insurers updating emergency contacts. Each signature I added cleared a space that had been crowded for too long. No final confrontation occurred. No last conversation. No plea for understanding. Evan didn't call again. Neither did Laura. The silence didn't wound. It gave me room to breathe. A job offer came from a non-profit Marcellus recommended. They needed a part-time technical consultant for water systems in rural Oregon. Field assessments, infrastructure planning, community training, nothing heavy, nothing political, just practical work. Work I understood. Work that mattered without requiring me to tie myself to anyone's expectations. The first week on the job took me to a small town near the Deschutes River. Gravel roads, friendly handshakes, straightforward problems. I walked properties with local volunteers checking pressure valves and outdated filters. A young couple offered apples from a backyard tree as thanks. One man brought out an old map and asked if I could mark potential well sites. No one cared about court hearings or family disputes. They only cared whether the water ran clean. Back at the studio, I organized my gear after each trip. New routines settled in. Morning stretching, evening walks along Alberta Street, a few weekend treks on the Columbia River Gorge trails. Grocery lists grew shorter. The space around me gradually shaped itself a small desk near the window, my father's pocket knife on a shelf, boots lined neatly near the door. Life didn't become simpler. It became honest. One afternoon after submitting a project report, the cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. The screen lit for a few seconds, then dimmed. No voicemail followed. Maybe Evan? Maybe someone else. The phone rested on the table beside me, still vibrating from the energy of the call. That wasn't. A drawer under the desk held the things I no longer needed: old contact cards, outdated account statements, the SIM that tied me to months of exhaustion. My hand moved almost automatically. The back of the phone slid open. The card slipped free between my fingers. No speech, no declaration. Just a decision made in the same steady silence that had carried me this far. The drawer opened with a muted pull. The SIM dropped in landing among papers that no longer mattered. The phone closed with a faint click under my hand. Work waited on the screen. A system design for a school well project needed adjustments. I sat back down, pulled the laptop forward, and continued typing while the drawer eased itself shut behind me.